impressions are another type of impression evidence that we can use at a crime scene, and different types of tire marks can indicate when there's an accident, the speed the car was going, when it left the road, or the direction in which it was traveling if it left the scene of a crime. And tire prints, just like shoe prints or even fingerprints, come in three different categories. We have patent prints, which, remember, patent is when there's a transfer of a substance onto another surface. So in this case, you see some sort of oil or something and the print is being made this way. Latent, of course, is hidden. You have to use special techniques in order to develop it, sometimes using powders or electrostatic lifting. And this last one down here is plastic, which is a three-dimensional impression. And to preserve this, of course, would be photographed, and then we would make a cast to make it last. Now, with tire impressions, we can get a lot of different information because looking at the tread pattern, if you see in this plastic print here, it's very specific. And that tread pattern, as well as measurements, can be taken in order to identify the type of car according to the tire. It won't give you the specific car, but it can give you relative size. And depending on what type of tire, you know what type of vehicle that you're looking at. And you can also see from some of the impressions the way the vehicle was driven. Now, um, talking about plastic prints a little bit more, we can think of, any surface that's going to leave this 3D impression. So sand, mud, snow, okay, somebody's lawn, if you think about that. And in looking at tires, there's a lot of different information that needs to be gleaned. And if we take a look, the tire has a lot of different parts to it, and we can look at the tread, okay, which is this individualized kind of pattern for the make of tire and what it's used for. This would also be called a rib, which is an elevated region of the tire. And then the indentations are called the grooves, and those are used, really for clearing water and air. There's a lot of different parts of the tire that are going to help, for its structure. These steel belts, nylon covers, and also you have the sidewall here. So when you're looking at the tire, the part of the tire that you see between the rim and the tread, that's actually the sidewall. So if we refer to that, you should know what that is. Now, there's different types of tires, and they all have different types of ridges and grooves because they all have different jobs. Some of them, you're looking at grooves so that they're going to channel water, and they're going to provide traction, they'll improve handling. And different manufacturers will have different widths between their grooves. Their grooves will be wider than others. The angle of the grooves are, okay? And then we have different types of tires that are manufactured. The first one is a touring tire, and this is really what you'll find on your everyday car. There's smaller grooves, okay, and you see this tread pattern. There's lots of different patterns that you'll see, but this purpose is really to channel air and water at high speeds so that you have connection with the road. And then if we looked at something like an off-road tire, you can see that there aren't really clear channels. All right, you've got these big bulky treads in the way, but they're much wider grooves, and you also see that the tread is much thicker. Okay, and that's because these tires are used for, things going over rocks and through areas that are not as easy to get through. All right, so you need some more traction for that. Now, and depending on how, cars are being used and how they're traveling will determine the type of tire that's going to be used. And when we're looking at these treads, you can see how unique this is compared to the other one. We're looking at imperfections in the tread pattern also that can be put there by the manufacturer when the tire was created. If there was something broken in the mold or something like that, that would be unique to, that batch of tires. And then we'd look for wear patterns and pebbles embedded in the grooves. So in order to get a tire print, like you do your fingerprint, we'd actually take ink and put it all over the tire tread and then roll the car over long pieces of paper. And they have to be about 3 meters long so that we can get a full rotation of the tire so that we make sure that we get the entire print, okay, a whole rotation. So once we have that, then we can figure out, looking at some other information, but let me show you one more tire. Here's a touring tire, which would be a street car, and here's a race car tire, which is called a racing slick. You can see that, they're used for different purposes. Here on the bottom, you've got, um, you know, actual contact with the road, but you have those grooves for air and water to go through, and then the tire slick does not have any of those because it wants the most rubber on the ground for traction. So we also are going to look at track width and turning diameter. So if we look at wheelbase, we're actually looking at the distance between the um, center of the front axle and the center of the back axle. So this line here where the car is sitting on, this would be the wheelbase. So from this emblem where the cursor is to this emblem, that's the wheelbase of the vehicle. And then track width, we're talking about the actual distance between one side of the car's tire to the other side of the car's tire. And you might have a different track width in the front and the back. So for instance, this car here, its track width, so from the center of this tire to the center of this tire, whoops, going back, of this tire is going to be 54.9 inches, and the track width in the rear is actually going to be 57.6 inches. So it's a little wider in the back. But remember, track width is the width of the car, okay, from tire to tire on the side. Wheelbase is actually going to be from the front to the back axle. Okay, and then we can talk about turning radius. And turning radius is really how tight a vehicle can turn in a circle, okay, how tight it can be driven in a circle. And we talk about turning radius because it has to do with the wheelbase of the vehicle. If it has a very long wheelbase, as you can see, this truck has a very long wheelbase, and it's much harder to make a turn. If this were a little car, it would be able to hug this little corner very tightly because it has a shorter wheelbase. So in looking at crime scenes, we can actually figure out the track width if we have measurements of, the tracks from the car. We can get the track width, the wheelbase, and figure out the turning diameter. And all of that information is actually in a database, so it can help us get the information of what kind of car we're looking for. So remember that the longer the wheelbase, okay, so the bigger the wheelbase, the bigger the size of the vehicle. And then we can figure out direction of the vehicle by the vegetation that's being disturbed, any debris that was cast off, any patterns that were created from splashing through puddles or other liquid substances, and transfer. So the goal really is to figure out what happened at an accident, when it happened, where it happened, how fast the vehicles were traveling, who was involved, and who was at fault. And this is really done by using skid marks. And skid marks come in lots of different shapes, but it's when it's a mark, as you can see on this pavement here at the scene of this accident, it's marks that are left on the road from suddenly braking and the wheels locking. And we can actually get information of when the brakes were applied, and then we can calculate how fast the car was moving using the skid to stop formula. And that is going to involve the weight of the car, texture of the road surface, length of the marks, and then they're going to calculate that to figure out who's at fault. There's a couple of other types of marks too. Yaw marks are produced when a vehicle is actually traveling around a curved path faster than it can handle it, so it's going to skid sideways. And then you actually get some of the melting of the tires between the tires and the road surface, from the extreme temperature. And you'll hear if somebody's, making these marks, you'll typically hear the car going around a turn. And tire scrubs, which are formed from a damaged or overloaded tire during or immediately after an impact. So if that tire is overloaded, there's too much weight in the vehicle, or it's damaged, they're not taking care of the tires, they're cracking, they're, there's too much air in them, anything like that. And you're going to end up having an irregular width. They're typically curved. They might actually have a striped look to them, and that's going to help determine the area of impact if you see some tire scrubs. So with all that information, tire marks, just like all of the other types of impression evidence that we talk about, are going to help investigators figure out, what happened at a scene.